The NFL Combine is in the books, and 8 former Notre Dame players had a chance to showcase themselves in the biggest job interview of their lives. Who helped themselves the most in Indianapolis? We've got a boots-on-the-ground report to break it all down on today's Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast, and I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum, producer at Fox Sports. It's great to have you here with me on Monday, March 3rd. No, it is not December. It is March. I had a little slip up in the last episode, but I got it right today, so that's all that matters. Thank you for starting your week right here by making this your first listen of the day. If you are not subscribed to the show, I'd really appreciate it if you took a quick second to hit that subscribe button because it goes a long way in helping out the show. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And let's get into it today. I will be joined by Drew Mentock, beat writer for Irish Illustrated, who is on the ground at the NFL Combine in Indianapolis over the weekend, covering the 8 former Irish players in attendance: Rylie Leonard, Beaux Collins, Mitchell Evans, Howard Cross, Rylie Mills, Jack Kaiser, Benjamin Morrison, and Xavier Watts. We'll break down their performances, discuss what scouts are saying, and predict how their draft stock is shaping up as we get closer to the NFL draft. Let's bring in Drew. All right, I'm joined now by Drew Mentock from Irish Illustrated. Drew spent the entire weekend in Indianapolis covering the NFL Combine, and now he is gracious enough to take some time out of his day to tell us about what he saw. 8 prospects from Notre Dame attended the event, and we'll talk about each one of them at some point along the way here. But big picture, what was your biggest takeaway from covering the event?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest takeaway is just that I think, especially in this new area of 12-team college football playoffs where it can go all the way into towards the end of January, that those teams that make those extended runs, the players from those teams, including Notre Dame's players this year, aren't necessarily going to be full participants. Of the 8 guys who were invited from Notre Dame, only Mitchell Evans was the person who said he was going to do everything. And I guess he technically didn't even bench press, so he came close to doing everything. But he is the only one too, I feel like, his stock kind of took a hit. I think he was like maybe the second or third tight end in this class coming into the season. And now if you look at like Mel Kiper Jr. or some of the other rankings, he's around 9th. So he probably wanted to come in and improve on that stock. And I don't necessarily think everyone else kind of would have felt the same way. So overall, biggest takeaway is you really only had one guy from Notre Dame to watch. Howard Cross also did 2 of like the measurement testings. He did the broad jump and vertical jump, but he didn't do anything that involved running or cutting. And then some other people did like specific position specific drills. So overall, I know Ohio State also had a bunch of guys not do much, and when they did, kind of look a little rusty.
So I think for fans, we obviously see what's televised, and a big part of the Combine is the media aspect of it and the interviews with all the coaches and the team members and things like that. So who do you think was the most impressive Notre Dame prospect from a media/interview perspective?
Yeah, I think Jack Kaiser is always impressive when he can kind of handle a bunch of questions. And from the media standpoint, it's kind of this big room, and they kind of bringing guys in all morning and putting them in different podiums. And you have a lot of other people, like I'm not, just going to Notre Dame guys, but you have people kind of popping over, just like answering, shouting generic questions that people are trying to catch them off guard to. And I feel like it's a lot of like people who cover NFL teams, and they want to know, oh, have you met with the Las Vegas Raiders this week? And I think those aren't necessarily difficult questions, but he didn't get frustrated. And I also think in general with team interviews too, he's a guy who presents very well. If you ask him to go to whiteboard, he's going to break that stuff down pretty well. And I think Bleacher Report even did something with him, like on social media, doing that too. So.
Yeah, I think with Kaiser, he really impressed a lot of people at the Senior Bowl, and you consider just how quick of a turnaround that was for all the guys who participated in that from Notre Dame to play in the national championship. Then a couple weeks later, they're out there playing more football after a 16-game season. It is a lot. But one of the guys who did that, who participated in the Senior Bowl, is Rylie Leonard. Now, he didn't test at the Combine, but he did throw in front of the scouts on Saturday, and I thought he looked really good. Daniel Jeremiah was very complimentary of him as well on the broadcast. We know he's a great athlete. athlete, but there are concerns about his passing. So how much do you think he improved his stock over the weekend?
Yeah, I definitely think he helped himself overall. I do think when watching some of those passes, I think the thing Daniel Jeremiah highlighted the most in those was his footwork seemed more improved, and he thought that helped with his accuracy. I think some of his passes weren't necessarily great in terms of timing, but also think those situations are tough because you're throwing with a bunch of receivers you've never really worked with before. Like, I think it's okay for your timing to be a little off. And I do think, though, when he comes to Notre Dame for his pro day, that will be even more significant. And he's also a guy I expect to test pretty well, too. So, yeah, I think he had a pretty good weekend. He's also always a good interview. I think he's somebody that when you talk to him, it's hard to not be taken aback by how genuine he is. He doesn't really, no matter who he's talking to, come across as guarded ever. So I have to think a lot of guys talked about the number one piece of advice they got going into the combine was like to be yourself and not try and, change anything. And I think from that piece of advice, that's something that Rylie Leonard typically seems to thrive on. So
I thought Rylie Leonard had a good explanation as to why he didn't test, and I think it's pretty applicable for the rest of the guys. So could you take us through his mindset and how that factored into his decision to just throw and not do any of the testing stuff?
yeah, definitely. I think, you look at him, like you mentioned, he did the Senior Bowl. I think that was February 1st. So that's 17 games over the course of, I guess that would be 5 months. So 17 games over 5 months. And then, so he has a month to get ready for the combine, maybe just a little under. And if you really look at how preparation for the combine is today, is they kind of retrain themselves. Some of them like kind of adjust how their bodies are to run the 40 better, to do the vertical better. They almost get a little bit out of football shape and put a lot of time into this. And if you are losing 3 or 4 weeks compared to other guys who stopped in early January, that really kind of puts you behind. And so in addition to like needing some time to recover after such a long season and kind of get ready, they every Notre Dame guy, every Ohio State guy is going to be really behind the 8 ball. And you don't want, in a event such as like the 40 or a lot of those things where, a few tenths of a second really make a difference. Yeah. You really don't want to shortchange yourself.
Yeah, I get that. And you think about just 2 months straight committed to just running in a straight line and doing the 3-cone drill and all that stuff. Apparently playing football is actually a bad thing for the NFL Combine. But I want to go through a few more specific guys. At one point, it felt like Benjamin Morrison was a lock to be a potential first rounder. It unfortunately has taken a bit of a dip because of his injury this past season. He talked about when he was able to return to action, return to training. So what is his plan for the future here before the NFL draft?
Yeah, so he said he returned to kind of doing stuff about 4 or 5 weeks ago is when he got cleared. So he has been training. He didn't, obviously like the other guys, didn't do any drills. Unlike everyone else who I think everyone else will work out at the pro day, he's actually having his own private showcase. And he'll work out there. It sounds like the date hasn't been set yet. It sounds like that'll probably be a little bit after Notre Dame's pro day to give himself even a little more time to train and get back into things. He'll still go to Notre Dame's pro day. I asked him about that, and he's like, yes, I'll be there to like support my guys. So I'm not going to miss that. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing that he kind of wants to do his own thing, but he, like you said, has a lot of pressure on. He's a guy who we looked at as a top 20 pick last summer and said he had 2 surgeries last year. So he has a lot he probably wants to prove, and that he wasn't even willing to commit on all the drills that he would do at his showcase, but he said he'll definitely be running the 40. And I'll be pretty curious to see how he runs because he is a very physical player, and I'm sure he's pretty fast, but I don't know if he's a 4.3 guy. I would imagine he's like kind of mid 4.4s, but maybe he'll surprise us. So that will be really interesting and could have a big influence on where he gets picked.
Drew will be right back here with me in a second to break down how Rylie Mills is recovering from his torn ACL that he suffered in the college football playoff. But first, a message from Roy. Attention Irish fans, the future of college sports is here and it's transparent. Before the Roy app, NIL negotiations often happened under the table and fans didn't have a clear way to directly support the athletes they love. Now with Roy, you get to be part of the change and support Irish athletes in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NIL app, allows you to choose the player you want to support, decide how much to contribute, contribute, and receive exclusive content from the athletes you support. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. It's a risk-free way to show your support. The Roy app is giving fans control. No more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the team and the future of college sports with your contributions. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Notre Dame athletes the way they deserve, with transparency, trust, and a real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. Another player who is recovering from an injury is Rylie Mills. And I think he's a guy who could have really lit it up at the NFL Combine. But unfortunately for him, he was unable to participate in any of the drills or the testing as he recovers from that torn ACL that he suffered against Indiana. Like, what is his outlook now that he's probably going to miss most of his rookie season?
Yeah, for this process, he said he began, in early January, looking at the combine as like the interview process with the teams will be his Super Bowl. Like, he was putting extra time in to watching film and training. And he said he even was calling like Jack Kaiser and asking him questions about coverage and stuff like that, because he just wanted to prove he was extra prepared. So I think his process right now has been like, I just need to crush these interviews, control what I can control. He just started walking without crutches, so he's still pretty far off. He said he hopes to be ready by training camp. That seemed a little ambitious, and he said whatever team he drafts him or signs him, that will actually be up to them to kind of decide his time frame. So he's probably just being a little optimistic for the interview process and trying to sell himself a little bit there. But yeah, it's definitely a bummer for him. I mean, he had a great season. He kind of had the breakout from like a sack and pressure perspective that we've been waiting for the last 4 years from him. And then he also confirmed that it was an ACL tear. So that's obviously something that takes a little while. Even if he's back doing football stuff by training camp, he's not going to be where he would like to be at that time. So.
Yeah, it's such a bummer, too, because, I mean, he'd been on Bruce Feldman's freak list for back-to-back years, and you hear about the numbers that he puts up in the Goog with their combine and their things like that. Like, I was really excited to see Rylie Mills, but unfortunately, that's not going to happen. Xavier Watts is another player who is really interesting to me because he was a terrific college football player, two-time All-American. I think he's the most accomplished safety in the history of Notre Dame, but I'm not sure how he's going to translate to the next level. I think he'll be a good player, but what do you think his ceiling is at the next level?
I mean, I definitely think he could be a, Pro Bowl type player. I think he has a pretty high ceiling. I mean, Julian Love has made, Pro Bowls after moving to safety. I think he's not a guy who I look is going to like test super well. I actually think it was probably to his benefit to maybe have an excuse not to do it at the combine. And you usually see guys have a little bit better numbers or more success at Notre Dame's Pro Day. I think that could help him a little bit, maybe a little bit more friendly arena for him to test in. Right now, he seems to be considered one of the top 3 to 5 safeties in this class. But I think he kind of fits in with where like the NFL game is going, where you need a guy who can be versatile and do a lot of different things. I think he's one of 2 players in Notre Dame's team this year who've played at least 100 snaps, like covering the slot, in the box, at free safety deep. So he kind of showed he can do it all. And I think a lot of times when guys have that breakout year like he had last year, you feel like they regress a little bit. And he's one of the few people who I feel like actually improved from the year before. His number, he had 1 less pick, but I think he was much better in coverage this year. And the biggest thing he said teams kind of knock him for in the interviews that he's kind of had to talk about is he doesn't miss a lot of tackles. And he kind of says that, he's an aggressive player. He comes up and really tries to finish plays. But I think that's probably the biggest thing that teams are kind of questioning of him right now, in addition to potentially his athleticism.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like I've heard that before. It was more of an issue last season, talking about 2023, but I thought he really did improve that this year. But good for him, man, because that is a risk to come back and play college football after the year that he had in 2023. And I'm with you. I think he absolutely improved his stock. But you mentioned Julian Love switching his positions. And now, looks like Howard Cross might have to switch positions. Now, he was a dominant force at times when he was at Notre Dame. He's also very aware of his limitations. He's a bit undersized. I thought his test numbers were pretty average. I still think he could be a very productive D tackle in the NFL. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Jordan Reed from ESPN reported that some teams wanted to test him out at fullback. What's the story there?
Yeah, I mean, I saw that too. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense from a potential body type, and I guess from one hand point, like it never hurts to have some like roster versatility. But that's also often a pretty ominous size. If a guy who's especially been as productive as Howard Cross has over that last 3 years, for them to be like, maybe you can't play this position. But I think, yeah, he's not a guy you mentioned. He did the broad jump and the vertical jump. He was either middle of the pack or the bottom of the pack in both. So not super impressive numbers, but he also he still had a fairly productive year last year. He was hurt most of it. I mean, he kind of came into fall camp with an ankle injury and dealing with a hamstring thing. And then those ankle injuries flared up towards the end of the year too. So I do think he's a guy that I am not confident will get drafted of kind of some of Notre Dame's best players are there. I think Pro Football Focus on their big board had him ranked like 279 coming into the combine. And I think there's 257 picks in the draft. So if you look at that, he's not necessarily on that trajectory, but I do think he's a guy who, if he can kind of get healthy and stay healthy, I wouldn't be surprised if he's on a roster next year.
Yeah, I was shocked when I saw that report about him switching positions because he was so good. And now, with all the injuries that he was dealing with this past season, his numbers did regress a little bit, but I still think he's a terrific player. I also thought when he spoke to the media, it was very interesting because he's very self-aware, honestly, a little bit more so than most NFL players. He talked about his size and some of the other limitations that he deals with. Like, what did you make of that? Because I feel like Howard Cross has always been a very introspective guy and someone who's just a really fascinating listen. But I thought that in this situation, for all these people who don't really know Howard Cross, who haven't seen him on a day-to-day basis because they're not covering Notre Dame, I feel like it was a bit of a surprise to some. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely who Howard Cross is. Like he's honest to a fault almost at times. Like he's very aware. I think the only time he might not be is he tries to make himself be just a little taller than what he is. Although he was legitimately 6'1", so I guess that's good that wasn't embellished. I always thought he was closer to my height potentially. But yeah, I think that's probably good though. Ultimately, from if you're an NFL team, you have a guy who's super productive, did a lot of things in college, and you don't want him to not be aware of those limitations. And I think, if anything, he learned how to play hurt well this year, which is something he's going to have to deal with in the NFL. And he's somebody who, because he's a little physically challenged, him losing a step or having, an ankle injury is probably going to impact him more than most guys. But at least he showed, for the most part, I guess, until the end of the year, that he can kind of fight through, especially in the playoffs, and still give you impactful reps, even if he's not at 100%.
Drew and I still have more to get to, including why Jack Kaiser's a chance to be a late riser in the NFL draft. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about a great new promotion courtesy of our friends at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Personally, I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. We talked about Jack Kaiser and his abilities in front of a microphone, but I thought he looked pretty good in linebacker drills. He didn't really test. I'm really excited to see him test at Pro Day because I think he's going to surprise a lot of people with his numbers. He played so much college football that I'm not sure a good pro day is really going to impact his draft stock. But what do you think the best case scenario is for Jack Kaiser in this NFL draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to say JD Bertrand was like an early 5th round pick last year. I kind of see like a similar trajectory. Maybe he'd go in the 4th round. It'd be tough to see him being like a day 2 pick, but I agree. I mean, I think for as much as he might be behind, in terms of training, and he didn't have much time off, and he's played 6 years of college football as it is, he's really had a great month in terms of his NFL draft stock. He killed it at the Senior Bowl. He was named like the American team's like linebacker MVP or whatever, which is voted by your peers, the running backs, offensive linemen, and tight end, I think, for your teams, with the guys you're actually going against in practice. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he tests pretty well at Notre Dame's pro day. But I agree, he, in some of the clips you saw of him at the combine, just going through the drills, he's very smooth. He's very kind of technically correct. And I think those things impress the scouts who are going to be there.
What's the likelihood that Al Golden decides that he needs Jack Kaiser for a few more years with the Cincinnati Bengals?
That would be pretty interesting. I don't know all the Bengals draft picks right now, but he did mention he bumped into Al Golden while walking through like the Indiana Convention Center hallways, and he's like, "Coach, you need to meet with me. You like want me to come up and do anything on the whiteboard?" And Al Golden's like, "No, we got all the information we need on you. Like, good luck." But I think I would not be surprised if that's a guy he was, if he can get him at a good value, especially that he would be pushing for the Bengals to take.
Yeah, he's a guy, he's a lot like JD Bertrand, where I feel like whoever drafts him, he's going to make the team because he's going to outwork everyone and make sure that he gets a spot on that roster. And plus, he's good enough. And I think we all saw that this year, expanded role. He had a really good season in his 6th and final year with Notre Dame. But one other guy we have not talked about, Beaux Collins. I'm not going to lie, I was a little surprised that he got the combine invite. But then you think about his physical traits and his numbers and all that stuff. I felt like, okay, it makes a little bit more sense, but he didn't test either. What do you think the general feedback is on Beaux Collins and his fit in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's one of those guys who probably got an invite, because I think sometimes they do maybe take chances and guys who are really highly rated come out of high school, and guys who might test well. Beaux Collins is another guy who was on the Bruce Feldman's freak list. I think he was 36th, so pretty highly rated. I assume he's a guy they thought would come and test. They probably, I think, I'm curious if the combine, I'm not even sure the process of like who makes all those decisions, but if they start not taking chances on guys who might not test, like it probably doesn't make sense. But he is a guy who I would expect to test very well. He talked a lot about, and I think this is probably gonna be pretty significant for his career, but in his interview with the media, of like how important special teams might be for him. And like whatever roster, and I think he might have even said this is advice he got from Al Golden specifically, but like get whatever camp you get invited to or roster you're on, like get in with the special teams coach and get on whatever special teams you can. And he is a guy who's, he's 6'3", he's explosive, athletic. He did special teams for Notre Dame. I know he's at least on kickoff return. So he's shown he can do some of those things. And I think that's definitely a niche that can get him on the field. His biggest thing, I guess, from an actual receiver standpoint is, and he acknowledged this, is that he needs to work on his hands. He led Notre Dame in drops this year. He said that during his interview, like that's something he's got to improve on. And he's talking to teams about that is going to be a focus. So.
Yeah, that was definitely an issue for Notre Dame at times this season. I had really high hopes for him when he came over, but then when you look at his numbers at the end, I mean, he's the leading receiver for Notre Dame, and it honestly matched up with his production from the previous years at Clemson, so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. But big picture, if you had to predict how many of these 8 guys will hear their names called in the NFL draft this year?
Yeah, if I had to guess, I'm going to guess maybe 6 guys get drafted. And it could be like, I wouldn't be surprised if Jordan Clark sneaks in there. Like, I think he had a really productive
season. I was bummed he didn't get an invite.
Yeah, RJ Oben technically got a Senior Bowl invite, which is usually harder to get than the combine. I'm kind of curious there. It's also worth noting that, like you looked at a guy like Sam Hartman last year. I think if you're going to be one of those late round picks, like, late or 7th round, maybe even 6th round, like your agent is probably trying to not get you drafted. They're probably telling teams not to take you because they usually have a deal that might be more advantageous or a situation that's more advantageous. So I think Hartman didn't get drafted, and then he signed like a $250,000 guaranteed contract with the Commanders right away. So sometimes some of these guys aren't going because they don't want to be at that point. So I think that's worth keeping in mind too. If you're a guy like Mills and it might be a little delayed, and you have a team that's like, we like you and we're going to be patient with you. If you're an NFL agent, you're going to try and be working that, I would think too. So I think that kind of plays into it as well.
Which NFL prospect do you think is going to be the biggest riser here as we're getting close to the NFL draft? It's only a couple months away.
Yeah, I mean, of the guys, I think it's going to be Kaiser. I also think Mitchell Evans had a pretty good combine. I guess we didn't really talk about that. I mean, I don't know if teams will kind of, even grade him a little bit on a curve as one of the few guys who played in the national championship. He also did 1 day of practice at the East-West Shrine Bowl. So he even did some stuff after. But he was maybe the third biggest tight end there, and he still ran. I think he ran tied for 7th best 40 time. His 10-yard shuttle was tied for first. So he really showed off his short area quickness, and he's a guy who's always thrived in zone coverage. So I think maybe you saw a little bit of why, like if he sees a hole in the zone, he has that agility to kind of get open. He did kind of struggle in the jumping stuff. So his vertical, was pretty poor. I think he might have even been second to last. But overall, I think when you take into account the fact that, he hasn't had that much time to train, and the fact that he really showed he was durable last year and then still went through and did this, I think that really adds to like, okay, we don't have to take the ACL. We can look at that as more as a fluke that he hurt his ACL, and he's a guy who really can push through and kind of keep going even after this longest season in college football ever.
A few of the guys talked about the current quarterback battle that's going on at Notre Dame. I was a little surprised by that, but what did you take away from the comments from Beaux Collins, Mitchell Evans, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think the overarching takeaway is that they're also pretty intrigued by it. I mean, obviously they got the question, that's why it came up, but I think, there's definitely 2 guys I think everyone thinks could win it, but they also said some pretty positive things about Kenny Minchey. I believe it was either Beaux Collins or Mitchell Evans effectively said like they could run a very similar offense in terms of having a quarterback who runs a lot with Kenny Minchey, which I guess I don't think of him as quite that level of athleticism, but his teammates seem to, and I think that, CJ Carr, Mitchell Evans, probably the most interesting comment was he called him a prodigy and then said he believes the hype. So that's pretty intriguing. But overall, I mean, they're not giving anything away, and I think Rylie Leonard was pretty nervous to answer that question. For a guy
I can imagine that.
Pretty off the cuff, he was like, "Please don't twist what I'm saying," like, So he did answer it, but I think, biggest takeaway is that they're pretty excited too, and it's probably, it's probably Angeli or Carr if I had to guess, even based on that how they answered things. But there's a lot of stuff that has to play out. So.
You can read all of Drew's work at irishillustrated.com. And thanks for taking the time to do this after a very busy weekend, man. I really appreciate it. We'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me on.
That'll do it for today's episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. I'm going to be right back here tomorrow morning, so make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. And if you're watching along on YouTube, please like the video below if you liked what you saw today. Or if you're listening to the podcast, please rate the show 5 stars and leave a review. I'll see you tomorrow.